Welcome back to Patriot Power Products Trusted Guides and Reviews, where everyone's favorite hosts, Jim and Ann, talk about essential information you can use right now, and the best products and the best discounts available online and elsewhere, for patriots following the American way.
Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're diving into something that we all hope we never need. But when you need it, you really need it.
Yeah.
It's emergency preparedness.
It is. And it's something that a lot of people kind of put on the back burner. You know, they think, oh, it'll never happen to me. But the truth is, emergencies happen all the time. And, you know, whether it's a natural disaster or a power outage or even just a simple accident in the home, it's important to be prepared.
Yeah, I think there's this feeling of like, I don't even know where to start.
Right.
You know, when you think about prepping for an emergency, it's just so overwhelming. So I'm hoping that today we can kind of break it down into some manageable steps.
Absolutely. And, you know, in my experience teaching survival courses, I've seen firsthand how people can go from feeling completely overwhelmed and unprepared to feeling confident and capable in just a short amount of time.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. When you think emergency preparedness, what's the very first thing that pops into your mind?
First aid, always.
Right. I mean, you just never know when you're going to need to use it, whether it's a kid falling off their bike, a burn in the kitchen, or, you know, even just a nasty splinter.
Right.
Knowing some basic first aid can make a huge difference.
Yeah, like that time my neighbor's kid fell and scraped his knee pretty badly. I was so glad I knew how to clean and bandage it properly.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to have a well-stocked first aid kit. And not just one, you know, shoved in the back of the bathroom cabinet, but maybe one in your car, one in your backpack if you go hiking.
Oh, yeah.
You know, multiple locations.
Yeah, for sure. And keeping them up to date too, right? I remember once needing something from my first aid kit and everything was expired.
Oh, yeah, that happens.
It was like 10 years old.
It's easy to forget about those things. So definitely check those expiration dates regularly.
Okay, so first aid kit, essential. Checked and updated regularly.
Yes.
What else?
Fire.
A fire.
Yeah, being able to start a fire.
Right. It's one of those things that a lot of people take for granted until they can't just, you know, flick a lighter. And suddenly they're in a power outage and they're like, oh no.
That was me. When was that? A couple of years ago, the power went out. I think it was like a storm or something.
Yeah.
And I remember just like frantically trying to start a fire. And it was so much harder than I thought it would be.
It definitely is not as easy as they make it look in the movies.
Absolutely not.
But the trick is to think outside the matchbox.
Okay.
You know, there are so many things you can use to start a fire with stuff you probably already have around the house.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, for starters, if you've got some sun, a magnifying glass works wonders.
Well, yeah.
You just need some dry tinder, like cotton balls or dryer lint.
Okay.
And believe it or not, a 9-volt battery and a little bit of steel wool can create a spark in seconds.
Wait, steel wool? Like the stuff you clean pots with?
The very same.
Wow.
It's incredibly flammable, actually. And speaking of surprising fire starters, did you know you can actually use Doritos? Doritos.
Doritos.
So kidding?
Nope, totally serious. The oil and the powdery coating make them surprisingly flammable.
I had no idea.
It just goes to show, you know, there's often more than one use for common items.
Okay. So we've got first aid, we've got fire starting down. What's next on the list?
Well, I think we got to talk about water.
Water, okay.
Yeah, we use it every day. We take it for granted, but in an emergency, clean water is absolutely essential.
Right. Like if there's a water main break or some kind of natural disaster that disrupts the supply.
Exactly.
Yeah, I actually went through something similar a few years back when a pipe burst in my building.
Oh, wow.
It was like a week without running water, and it was a real wake-up call.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. Remember when I was telling you about that week-long water main break?
Right.
That was rough.
Yeah.
So yeah, you got to be prepared to be your own source for a while.
So how much water should we be storing? Like, what's the recommendation?
A good rule of thumb is 1 gallon per person per day.
And you want to aim for at least a 3-day supply, but ideally 2 weeks?
2 weeks. Wow. Okay.
And don't forget to rotate that stored water every 6 months.
Right. Because it can go bad.
It can lose its freshness. And, you know, you don't want to be drinking stale water in an emergency.
No, definitely not.
So use food-grade containers for storage. That's important.
Okay. Good to know. Now, what about if your stored water runs out? Are there other ways to get clean water in a pinch?
Oh, there are definitely some hidden sources around your house.
Yeah.
Your water heater tank, for example, can hold up to 40 or 60 gallons.
Oh, wow.
And even your toilet tank, not the bowl, obviously,
Right.
but the tank can hold a couple of gallons.
I never would have thought of that.
Yeah, and those are just a couple of examples. There are other places you can find water, but of course, any water you find like that needs to be purified.
Of course. How do we do that?
Well, boiling is always the most reliable method.
Okay.
Just bring the water to a rolling boil for 1 minute or 3 minutes if you're at a higher altitude.
Okay, got it. And I've also heard that you can use bleach to purify water.
You can, but you have to be very careful.
Okay.
Make sure it's unscented plain bleach.
Right.
And use it sparingly, just 2 drops per quart of water.
2 drops, okay.
Let it sit for 30 minutes before drinking.
Okay, what about water filters? Are those a good option for emergency preparedness?
Yeah, definitely a good water filter can remove sediment bacteria, even some viruses.
Mm-hmm.
Ceramic filters, activated carbon filters, reverse osmosis systems, those are all effective.
What about those UV purification devices?
Those are really cool. They use UV light to kill bacteria and viruses, but they usually require batteries or a power source, which could be a problem in an emergency.
Okay, so water purification, that's another essential.
Absolutely.
What else should we be thinking about?
Well, we've covered water, so let's move on to food.
Okay, food.
Yeah, remember when I mentioned that water main break? Well, it was also a week of no power, which meant no stove, no fridge, no microwave. And let me tell you, learning to cook and preserve food without electricity is a total game changer.
Yeah, I think my longest power outage was about 9 days.
Yeah.
And it was rough.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some practical ways to cook when the grid goes down.
All right, so get ready to embrace your inner outdoorsman because one of the most reliable methods is a good old-fashioned solar oven.
Oh, yeah.
You can actually build one yourself with just a cardboard box and some aluminum foil.
Really?
Yeah, it's surprisingly effective for baking and even slow cooking.
That's awesome. I've always wanted to try building one of those.
You should. It's a fun project.
Okay, so what about if you need something a bit more heavy duty, like for boiling water or cooking a larger meal?
Well, in that case, a rocket stove is your new best friend.
A rocket stove? What is that?
It's a super efficient wood-burning stove made from simple materials like tin cans.
Okay.
You can find plans online and build one in an afternoon.
Wow, and what about like a Dutch oven?
Oh, yeah. A Dutch oven is perfect for stews and anything you can simmer over coals.
Yeah, those are great for camping too.
It's exacta.
Okay, so we've got some cooking options covered, but what about preserving food without refrigeration?
Dehydration is your best bet for long-term storage.
Okay.
Think jerky, dried fruits, even veggies. You can use a dehydrator, but even a simple setup with a box fan and some air filters works wonders.
I've actually tried dehydrating food at home. It's easier than you'd think.
Yeah, it is, and the results are delicious.
Yeah, and it's a great way to reduce food waste too.
Absolutely.
So we've got dehydration down, but what about fresh produce like vegetables? How do you preserve those?
Well, that's where fermentation comes in.
Fermentation, okay.
Yeah, things like sauerkraut, kimchi, pickled veggies. Those are all fantastic ways to preserve food without refrigeration.
And they're good for you too, right?
Exactly. They're packed with probiotics, so they're good for your gut health.
Fermentation is so popular these days. I can totally see why.
Yeah, it adds a lot of flavor too.
What about root vegetables like potatoes and onions?
For those, root cellaring is a great option.
Root cellar?
It's a traditional technique that's making a comeback.
What?
You basically create a cool, dark, and slightly humid environment to store those veggies.
So where do you do that?
It can be as simple as a designated corner in your basement, or even a buried container in your backyard.
Interesting. Okay. So many great options for food. I'm feeling much more confident about that now. But what about communication?
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
When things go haywire, communication is key.
Absolutely. Picture this. A massive storm knocks out the power grid. Cell towers are down. You have no way to contact your loved ones.
Okay, that's scary.
It happens, and that's why having alternative communication methods is so important.
Like what?
Well, two-way radios are a great option.
Okay.
They don't rely on cell towers, and they can have a range of several miles.
Okay.
Hand crank emergency radios are also handy for getting weather alerts and news broadcasts.
I've seen those advertised, but I've always wondered how well they actually work.
They can be lifesavers.
Okay.
They often come with built-in flashlights and even USB ports for charging your phone.
Oh, that's handy.
And don't discount the humble CB radio.
Really?
Yeah, they might seem old school, but truckers and emergency responders still use them, and they can be surprisingly reliable.
So you're saying my dad's old CB radio might actually come in handy?
You never know.
Who knew? Okay, but what about situations where you can't use a radio, like if you need to signal for help?
A signal mirror can be a lifesaver during daylight hours.
Okay.
It can reflect sunlight for miles and attract attention.
Right.
And of course, there's the classic whistle.
Oh, yeah.
3 blasts is the universal signal for distress.
Okay, good to know. So simple but effective.
Exactly.
But beyond just signaling for help, what about staying in touch with family and friends, especially if you're separated during an emergency?
Having a solid communication plan is vital.
Okay, what does that look like?
Well, first off, designate an out-of-area contact
Okay.
that everyone can check in with. It's easier for everyone to call one person who's outside the affected area than to try and reach everyone individually.
That makes sense.
And having a designated meeting point is crucial too, just in case you get separated.
Right.
Pick a place that's easy to find and familiar to everyone.
Okay.
And make sure everyone has a list of important phone numbers written down. You never know when your phone might die, and you can't access your contacts.
That's a good point. I always forget about that.
Yeah, it's easy to rely on our phones too much these days.
Definitely. So communication plan's super important.
Yes.
And don't forget about those official emergency alert systems.
Oh, yeah, those are important too. NOAA weather radio is a must-have for severe weather alerts.
Those are the ones that go off with that really loud ear-splitting tone, right?
That's the one. They may not be pleasant, but they could save your life.
True.
And pay attention to the Emergency Alert System, EAS, broadcasts on TV and radio.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, always heed local sirens and warnings.
Right. Okay, so we've covered communication. What other essential aspects of emergency preparedness should we be aware of?
Well, one area that often gets overlooked is tool usage and maintenance.
Yeah,
Yeah, having a toolbox full of gadgets is useless if you don't know how to use them properly.
That's me. I have so many tools, and I have no idea what most of them do.
Yeah, a lot of people are in the same boat, but it's important to learn the basics.
Okay, so where do we start with tool basics?
Let's start with the essentials that every household should have.
Okay.
A multi-tool with a knife, pliers, a screwdriver,
Okay.
a wrench set, a hammer, screwdrivers, both Phillips and flathead, a utility knife, duct tape, and of course, WD-40.
Okay, I think I have most of those, but what about maintenance? I'm definitely guilty of neglecting my tools.
It's all about keeping things clean, dry, and in good working order.
Okay.
Clean your tools after each use, store them in a dry location, oil any metal parts to prevent rust.
Right.
Sharpen blades regularly, and always check for damage before using any tool.
Okay, so simple but essential tips.
Exactly.
Now, while we're on the subject of tools, let's talk about some basic repairs that everyone should know how to do.
Okay.
Things that could be crucial in an emergency.
Yeah, we're not talking about rebuilding an engine or rewiring your house.
Right.
But knowing how to stop a water leak patch, a hole in drywall, tighten loose screws and bolts, unclog a drain, and practicing basic electrical safety.
Okay.
These are all skills that can come in handy.
Those sound much more manageable.
They are.
Like I could actually learn those things.
Absolutely. And there are tons of resources available online and in libraries.
Okay.
And don't be afraid to ask a handy friend or family member for guidance.
Right.
Learning these skills is empowering, and you might even discover a hidden talent for DIY.
I love that turning a potential crisis into an opportunity for learning and personal growth.
Exactly.
But even with all the tools and skills in the world, emergencies can still be really stressful.
Oh, yeah.
And emotionally draining.
Absolutely. It's true. And, it's not just about dealing with the immediate crisis, but also the aftermath.
Right.
Things like stress, anxiety, even grief. Those can linger long after the initial event is over.
So what can we do to build up that inner strength, that resilience?
Yeah.
It feels kind of intangible.
It does seem that way, but there are definitely some practical steps you can take.
Okay.
One of the most powerful tools is mindfulness.
Oh.
Things like meditation, deep breathing exercises, even just spending time in nature.
Mm-hmm.
Those can all help you stay grounded and manage stress.
I can see how those would be helpful, not just in emergencies, but in everyday life too.
Exactly. It's all about training your mind to respond to challenges in a more calm and focused way.
Right.
And don't underestimate the power of connection.
Oh, yeah.
Having a strong support network of friends and family can make a huge difference.
For sure. Knowing that you have people you can rely on can make those tough situations feel a little less daunting.
Exactly. And remember, it's okay to not be okay. Emergencies can be traumatic. It's normal to experience a range of emotions.
Right.
So don't be afraid to reach out for professional help if you need it.
Absolutely. There's no shame in seeking support.
Mm-hmm.
Now, before we wrap up, I wanted to touch on one more aspect of emergency preparedness that I think often gets overlooked, and that's community.
Oh, that's a great point.
Yeah.
Emergencies often bring out the best in people, and a strong sense of community can be so valuable.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the me and mine mentality.
Right.
When you're thinking about preparedness. But in reality, we're all interconnected.
We are. And don't forget about the power of social media.
Oh, yeah?
During emergencies, platforms like Facebook and Twitter can become lifelines for communication,
Right.
sharing information, coordinating assistance.
Yeah. I remember during that big ice storm a few years ago, my neighborhood Facebook group was amazing. People were posting updates about road closures, offering to help those who were stranded.
Yeah.
It was really heartwarming to see everyone come together.
It's amazing how quickly communities can rally in times of need.
It is. But of course, it's important to verify information.
Yes.
Before sharing it and rely on official sources. So as we wrap up our deep dive into emergency preparedness, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
Start now.
Start now.
Okay.
Don't wait for an emergency to happen before you take action. Even small steps like building a basic first aid kit, learning how to purify water, practicing a fire starting technique.
Right.
Those things can make a huge difference in your confidence and your ability to handle whatever comes your way.
I love that it's about empowering ourselves with knowledge, skills, connections.
Exactly.
And remember, preparedness is a journey, not a destination. It's an ongoing process.
Absolutely. It's not about being paranoid or living in fear. It's about being resourceful, resilient, and ready for anything.
Beautifully said. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
My pleasure.
This has been an incredibly informative and inspiring conversation.
And to all of our listeners out there, we hope you feel empowered to take action and start building your own path to preparedness. Remember, knowledge is power, and with the right tools and mindset, you can face any challenge with confidence. Stay curious, keep learning, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.